Hi, my name is Stuart Lynch, and this is the second video in the two-part project where we're building a simple application in SwiftUI that uses Realm for our data store and focuses on implementing a one-to-many relationship. This is the fourth video in the Realm series. This video is sponsored by AppFigures. AppFigures makes tracking the business side of your apps like downloads and revenue a breeze, while also helping you to grow your downloads with very intuitive tools for App Store optimization and for competitive intelligence. And it's not just the tools. Ariel from AppFigures shares guides, tutorials, and even hosts live streams to teach you how to promote your app. I also recommend checking out his YouTube channel for weekly news about apps. AppFigures helps you spend less time tracking and more time developing. Sign up with my code, Stuart3030, to get 30% off your first 3 months. Links are in the description below. Thanks again to AppFigures for sponsoring this video. If you have not yet watched the first video, I recommend that you do that first. This video extends from that video and uses the completed project so far. I've provided a link to that completed project if you wish to download and start from there for this video. We have a few things to accomplish in this video. We will enable rearranging cities in the cities list view. We'll see how we have to change things to delete a country. And we'll look at inverse relationships. And finally, how we can add new properties to a Realm database and perform a migration when the app launches. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. One of the interesting things about a Realm list is that it's like a Swift array. They can be filtered and sorted using the predicates as a result type. Unlike a result type, however, we have the ability to position or move elements within a list as the items are ordered and will remain that order between sessions. Run your application now and make sure that you have at least one country and 2 or more cities. In my example here for Canada, I have 3 cities, but the order of the list is the order in which I created them. I don't want to sort them. I want to determine the order through drag and drop. For example, I'd like to arrange them in the order in which I want to visit, say from the east coast to the west. This would mean Toronto, then Calgary, and then saving the best for last, Vancouver. And this is really easy with a list. If I return to Xcode and open the Cities List view, I can add an Edit button to the navigation toolbar. And I know this view has been pushed onto the navigation stack by virtue of the navigation link, so we know that we inherit the navigation bar, which means that we can add a toolbar item. With a toolbar item, with the placement being a navigation bar trailing. We'll add then just the Edit button. That's it. Let's run our app now and go to that screen. I'll tap the Edit button and see that we can get the delete action, which we've already coded. Well, it turns out that the list object also has a move function on the to and from indices, and it was just as easy to implement as the delete function. It works the same way. Instead of performing the remove operation, we can just perform the move function. Let's test again. Let's go to our list of Canadian cities. If we tap on the Edit button now, it displays the move icon to the right of each row. I can tap and hold and drag our cities to the location that I want. Let me stop and run the application again to see if those moves persisted. They did. So this is great, but there's one limitation here. Let me show you the problem. Run your application and add a new country. Say France. Let's go to the Cities view and add a new city. Paris. Return to Xcode and add a delete function for each row in the for each loop of the countries list view. I know, since we are sorting in our for each loop, this will cause a problem. Let me just emphasize that right now by showing you again, in case you missed that in the to-do list project that we worked on. Now run your application and delete France. Do you see what happened? France wasn't deleted. Instead, the United States entry was. And this is because we're deleting based on the country's results order, not on the sorted countries that we're iterating over. The index is the original index. So the United States was in that second place instead of France. Let's return to Xcode and remove that sort order and try again. Let's remove France once more, and this time it looks like it's gone. Let's open Realm Studio and check. Uh-oh, Paris is still in our cities list. Let's check our countries. Well, France is gone. And it looks like Realm doesn't support cascading deletes, so it means that we'll have to do that in code or manually. Here's where we'll start to run into some limitations of property wrappers. We'll have some issues to solve. I'm going to return to Xcode and paste back my sort order, but comment out this code for onDelete, as I'll need to do something else. To delete the correct country, we'll need to create a new delete function that will do a couple of things. The delete function will receive the index set from the onDelete function and then get the country that was selected, turning it into an equivalent sorted array, and find the country at that index. And then, if there are no cities, we can remove the country from the results. So create a function called deleteCountry with one parameter, indexSet, that accepts an index set. Next, we can do a guard check to find the first index of that index set, else we'll just return. Should never fail. Next, we can just copy that sorted results set from our for each loop and convert it into an array and pick the one that was at that index we swiped on and assign it to a new variable called selectedCountry. Next, we'll do a guard check to see if the selected country's cities is empty. And if it isn't, we will present an alert, which we'll code in a minute and return without deleting. Now, if we've made it this far, we can call the bound observed results countries remove function by using the $sign and then remove the selected object. Now, to present the alert, we'll need a property to observe. So this will be a state property that we'll call presentAlert, and we'll initialize it as false. And then in the else part of our guard check, before we return, we can toggle this property. So now we can add an alert to the navigation view, telling the user that they need to delete all of the cities in this countries first. It's going to be bound to the isPresented property, and there's no need for any action. Finally, we can go back and uncomment our onDelete function now, but this time we'll need to call our new deleteCountry function instead. And since it has the same arguments as the old remove one, we don't need to pass in the index set. Let's test this out. If I try to delete Canada, I can't. I would have to go to the Cities tab and delete all of the cities first. If I try to delete the United States, which has no cities, I can. No problem. If I open Realm, I see that the old Paris city is there, so we'll have to deal with that next. But I can see that the United States is removed from the country list. Right now we can find our cities by first going to the country. What if we wanted to view a list of all of our cities and know what country that they were in, right from that list? And this is an inverse relationship. Each city in this case has a single country associated with it. Each of our cities has exactly one country. So what I want to do is to create a new view that will display all of our cities and then display along with it the name of the country that it belongs to. Well, this requires a new persisted property in our cities model. It's not a stored property, so there's no problem doing this in Realm. And it will link back to its origin. So open the city model and create a new persisted property that links back to its origin. Now, Realm already knows about that, so this isn't going to cause any problems. Open the city model and create that new persisted property, but like the one with the primary key, we want to use a different argument, and that's the origin property. This is the string that represents the property in the parent model that generated that list of cities, and that is cities. It's a string. And we can give that name country, and it is of type linking object to the country model. Notice that the term linking objects is plural. Since this is an inverse relationship, in other apps, the single city or child object could link to many objects, and we'll go through that in an example in the next application. Next, in the Views folder, create a SwiftUI file and call it All Cities View. Import Realm Swift. Create an observed results property on city.self. But this time, since we'll not be adding or modifying cities in the view, we can create a sort descriptor right here where the key path will be the name property and assign it to a variable that we'll call cities. Now I want to wrap the list of cities in a navigation view. And then I'm going to present a list, but I want to use a for each so that I can call the delete function. So we can use for each on the cities, providing us with the city as the iterator. Then I'll create an HStack with a text view displaying the city's name. And then I'll create a spacer. We can create another text view that will display the country name. Remember, I said that the linking objects could link back to many? And I know we only have one, so we can choose the first one if it exists. But also remember that we have an orphan Paris city still there, so we can use the nil coalescer to specify no country if it can't find the country. Since we use the sort descriptor in the observed results, we can safely use onDelete here to perform the cities remove function. And then we can set the navigation title to All Cities. Well, now we have the view, we have to have some way to display it. So I'm going to use a tab view. So I can do this right at our entry point. So return to where the app begins, where the app main attribute is, and create a tab view. Move that countries list view into that tab view, and set a tab item that is a label using the text countries, and then for the system image, use list.dash for lack of something better. The second item in the tab will present the All Cities list view, and I'll use the same tab item, but I'll just call it Cities. Let me run this once more now then. I can see that tab view when it launches. And if I go to cities, I can see a list of all my cities sorted by name. And Paris is showing up as having no country. Well, I can't change that for now. That's for another video. But I could delete it and create France again and then add it back. I have one more thing that I want to cover, and that is the ability to add new properties to one of our models. For example, let's say we want to add a new property that will be the flag of the country. And there are emojis for most countries, so I can use that as a string. So I'm going to return to the country model and add one more persisted property and call it flag. And that will be a string. And then you can use the Control Command spacebar to bring up the emoji picker and search for flags. And since we don't know what the default country that's going to get created is going to be, we'll use a white flag just as a placeholder. Let's run the app now and see what happens. Boom. It crashes with an error that country.flag has been added, and then there is this error code. We need to be able to, when the app launches, migrate our current realm, which has no flag property, to a new version that does have one, and then set the default to all of our existing countries to that default flag so that we can change them later. And this is called a migration in Realm. So in order to accomplish this, I'm going to create a new class that I'll be calling Migrator. So create a new file and give it that name, Migrator. Import Realm.Swift and create that class. Create a function in that class and call it update schema. Leave the function empty for now, but when we initialize the class, we want to be able to call this function. Well, inside our function then, we'll create an instance of the realm.configuration struct, and that's going to allow us to set a new schema version and perform a migration at the same time. And we do this by starting with letConfig equals realm.configuration, and choose this one with all these optional arguments, and some of them have assigned default values. Well, it turns out that we don't need, in our case anyway, any of the optional arguments, and the default ones will just be fine, except for the schema version and the migration block. Well, since we've never specified a schema version before, it's set to its default, which is 0. So this will be our first migration. So we can set then the next version to 1. If we hit enter on the migration block, I'll get a migration property and an old schema version, which I know must have been 0. So we can do a check on the initialization to see if this app has already performed the migration. If it has, it will be at schema version 1. If not, it must be less than that, 0. So if this is true, then we need to add our flag. So for this then, we'll use the migration with the enumerated objects function that asks us for which class we are trying to iterate over, and that type is country, and we have to specify class name. The second property is another closure that has an old object and a new object. This means that if we want to access other properties in our existing schema, they would be properties of the old object. We don't in this case, so we can replace that just with an underscore. For the new object though, this is the new flag property that we need to assign to our object with that same white flag. Now this is an optional property because we might have mistyped the property name, in which case then it won't exist. But we haven't, so we can safely unwrap it here. Once this is done, then we can set the realm configuration to this new one. And then we'll save it back to Realm using let Realm equals try force unwrapped Realm. That last line will become much more familiar to you in future videos. We never actually use this property here, so we can use an underscore to silence that warning. One final thing that we need to do is to return to our app file to create an instance of the migrator so that it runs every time the app launches. The next time it launches, it will know that the schema is now 1, so the migration block will not happen and the app will carry on. Let's test run. The migration happened and there are no errors. Let's open the Realm file now. If we go to the countries model, we can see that our 2 old countries now have that default white flag. The rest of this video now has very little to do with Realm, but I hate not completing a project, so since we have a new flag property, let's display it on the country list. Well, this is getting to be a rather long video, so I prepared a file that we can use to help us with picking up the flag. And this is the file called CountryInfo that you can download from the link in the resources below. Drag it to your models folder. It's a struct that has properties for name and flag and country code, which we can use as the ID property because I want to display a list of flags showing the name of the country along with the flag. This file contains a JSON string that I got from this website. You can see that it contains all of the countries and their names along with some of the other things, but I use coding keys to map the name, code, and emoji properties to my name, flag, and country code properties. I then create a static property called array. That's an array of all these objects that I can use in my picker. Within the views folder, then create a new SwiftUI file called flag picker. Import Realm+Swift. We'll be using this struct to display a list of all countries and their flags. And if we are changing an existing flag, remember it's initially in the white flag category, we'll need to pass in a country object so that we can set the flag property on that object. This means that the country must be an observed Realm object. We can also add an instance of a country to our preview picker, even though we're not displaying one. We'll be revealing the picker as a modal sheet so we can create an environment variable for the dismiss key path and assign it to the variable dismiss. We'll also want to filter the list based on a country name so that we can filter the list to find the right country, because the country name that we use here may not match the country name that we used, and I'm guilty of that for sure. This will require an array of our country info that will be equal to our static country info array if search text is empty. Otherwise, we can filter the array, filtering it for all countries that contain the search field's filter text. So create the state property that will then be the search text and initialize it as an empty string. Now create a computed property for search results that's going to return an array of country info, and we'll do it exactly as I just described. If the search text is empty, we'll return the original country info array. Otherwise, we'll return the country info array, but filtered, where the lowercase name contains the search text's lowercase. Now we can create the picker view. For the body, create a navigation view, and inside there, create a list using a for each loop on the search results, providing a country info iterator that we can use. Create a button For the label, we can use an H stack. And the first item is going to be a text view displaying the CountryInfo's name, followed by the CountryInfo flag. Add a spacer so that to the right then, we can, if country.flag is equal to the countryinfo.flag, meaning that's the one that we passed in, we'll display an image using the system name of a checkmark. For the action then, we can set the bound country.flag's wrap value to the countryinfo flag. And then dismiss the modal. And then to get our search, we'll add a searchable modifier to the list using that bound search text for the text. And then to make sure that the search bar is always displayed because we're in a navigation view, I'll set the placement for the navigation bar drawer to have the display mode set for always. And then we can add a navigation title of flag. I'll set the navigation display mode to inline. And then finally, I'm going to add a toolbar. And it will have a single toolbar item that has a placement of navigation bar trailing. And that will simply be a button using an image for a label. And that's going to be the system name x.circle. And then the action here will be to call that dismiss function for the modal. All we have to do now is to provide a trigger for the presentation of the modal sheet. In the country row view, create a state Boolean property called showFlagPicker and initialize it as false. Add a button as the first item in the H stack that has the country flag as the string for the text view label, and the action is going to be to set the showFlagPicker to true. And then add a sheet modifier to the view where isPresented is bound to the showFlagPicker. And then we can present the flag picker passing in the country. One more thing I almost forgot. In order to make the button active on the list instead of taking us into the navigation stack, I have to set the button style to plain. Let's test. Let's tap on that white flag beside Canada. I can search then in the search field in the presented modal and start typing and filter on Canada and select it. Let's try Great Britain. When I search, I can't find it. And that's because of my ignorance. It isn't Great Britain, it's the United Kingdom. So if I type that in, I can filter and find it. Let's stop and run once more to make sure that those edits have persisted. Yes, we have. Well, that's it for Property Wrappers and the new Realm for SwiftUI. In the next application that we create, we're going to move away from Property Wrappers mostly and use an MVVM model to render our content. This will be a different approach that I actually prefer since it allows us to move the business logic like editing and deleting objects out of our view into a view model. Thanks again to AppFigures for sponsoring this video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.